All right, welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're jumping into something, well, it sounds a bit like science fiction, actually.
It does a bit, doesn't it? We're looking at AI, augmented reality, and ballet.
The ballet. And how all these things, plus synthetic data, are coming together in some really interesting educational research.
That's right. We've been digging into some research in progress papers about this AR ballet project. It's designed to teach computing, but also, crucially, the ethics involved.
Okay, so what's our plan here? We want to unpack what synthetic data actually is, right?
Yeah, and why use it in a project like this? Especially, thinking ethically.
And how does it connect to things like biometrics, brainwaves, movement, and AR?
And touch on the big questions this raises:
Hmm.
privacy, data ownership, that kind of thing.
Okay, let's start basic. Synthetic data. What are we talking about?
So imagine data that's cooked up by a computer, artificially generated,
Okay.
but it's designed carefully so it reflects the statistical patterns and the characteristics of real-world data.
So it looks like real data, statistically speaking.
Pretty much. But crucially, it doesn't contain information you can trace back to a specific person.
Ah, okay. And that's the key reason they're using it here.
Exactly. The researchers point out it's a way to avoid major privacy and consent problems, especially when you're dealing with really sensitive stuff.
Like biometric data,
Yeah,
things from our bodies.
precisely. Think brainwave patterns, EEG data, or specific movement signatures from dancers. That stuff is deeply personal.
So using synthetic versions lets them kind of sidestep needing direct consent for that specific data distribution in the final product.
It helps navigate that, yes. They can work with data derived from real inputs, real movements, real brain activity, but without distributing the raw, identifiable, sensitive data itself. Especially important if they involve, say, students or other groups where consent can be complex.
Makes sense. And the project itself sounds fascinating. An AR episodic ballet.
Yeah, that's the concept. Use synthetic data, which originally comes from real dancers' EEG readings.
Brainwaves again?
And movement data, which they get using things like MoCapNet to capture 3D poses from video. This synthetic data then drives the experience in augmented reality.
So the synthetic data is the dance, or shapes it, in the AR view.
That seems to be the goal, yes. But it's not just art for art's sake. The core aim is education.
Right, you mentioned that.
It's a tool for pre-university students, even artists maybe without a tech background, to learn about creative coding, programming, AR.
And the ethics we keep mentioning. Data ethics, AI responsibility.
Exactly. Using this ballet project as a kind of tangible example.
What a cool way to teach that stuff. Much
Well,
more engaging than a textbook.
Definitely. And the papers mention the process they plan to use tools students might encounter, like Google Colab, Python libraries, maybe things like Synth Data Vault to generate the data.
So it ties into practical programming skills, too.
Right. And there's a narrative, apparently. Astronauts, data, identity, and one episode using only synthetic data.
Which brings us right back to the ethics. It seems like that's really central.
It absolutely is. Using synthetic data solves some problems, but, well, it raises others. And the project wants to tackle these head on.
Like what kind of issues?
Well, the sources mention bias. If the original data from the real dancers had biases, those might get baked into the synthetic version, maybe even amplified.
Ah, so the synthetic dancers might inherit stylistic quirks or limitations from the original performers.
Potentially, yeah. There's also the question of, like, nuance. Can synthetic data truly capture the subtle richness of real human movement or expression?
Good point.
And transparency is key. Even with synthetic data, they argue you need to be clear. Where did the original data come from? How was this data made? Who are the original artists?
Which leads to ownership, right? If my unique dance style trains an AI that generates synthetic dances, who owns that output? Is it still mine in some way?
That's a huge question, especially for artists. And this project seems designed to make students grapple with exactly these kinds of complex issues. Using synthetic data becomes a case study.
So why should you, listening now, care about this deep dive?
Well, it's a snapshot of how complex tech, AI, AR, is really intercepting with creative fields. It's not just theory.
And it forces us to think about our own data, our bodies, our privacy, our creativity, as the world gets more digital, more immersive.
And remember, it's research in progress. They're testing things, generating data. They even note challenges like synthetic movement maybe not feeling as real.
But understanding limitations is part of learning too.
Absolutely.
That's a really interesting intersection. And it leaves us with a thought maybe for you to ponder.
Mhm.
As tech gets better at digitizing and synthesizing us, our movements, maybe even our thoughts via EEG, where do we draw the line between data, privacy, art, ownership? What does it even mean to dance with data that isn't quite human?
A question we'll likely be asking a lot more.
Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.